Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
we can open schools and open them safely.
The latest on the standoff between Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union.
Because now we're in this political tug of war.
Will students return to in-person learning in Chicago? We hear from two parents on being caught in the middle of negotiations.
It's time to get back to work.
The pandemic shouldn't slow down the legislature. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more.
Today, Chicago sends a message, a national message, that we are against the scapegoating of immigrants.
Aldermen discuss expanded protections for Chicago's immigrant community and measures to curb gentrification. As people of color continue to feel locked out of Illinois' marijuana industry, we talk with the governor's cannabis advisor on how to remedy the situation.
Before there was Eric Garner, there was Emmett Till.
The significance of today's city council vote making Emmett Till's childhood home a Chicago landmark.
Art fulfills a spectrum of our desire and our need as people.
And a relief aid bill that's aimed at helping arts workers across the country. But first, some of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker says the state will get more doses of the COVID-19 vaccine next week, but warned demand will still far outstrip supply for the foreseeable future. Pritzker, speaking at an event to launch a new drive-through vaccination site at the Lake County Fairgrounds, says people have to be patient.
We have more than 3 million people in phase 1B, and that we're only getting vaccines, first dose vaccines, on the order of, well, now it'll be probably around 140,000 per week. I think patience is the watchword here.
The governor also pushed back on critics who say the state's vaccine rollout isn't going well after a New York Times assessment ranked Illinois 43rd out of 50 states in vaccine distribution. Pritzker says that when you take out doses set aside for long-term care facilities and second doses that, quote, actually, we're doing quite well as a state. At least some high school sports will soon be back. The Illinois High School Association announces several sports, including basketball, diving, and cheerleading, can begin practicing as soon as possible, while football can begin March 3rd. Neither basketball or football will have a state tournament. Baseball, softball, track, and most other sports will start their seasons April 5th. State health officials report more than 3,700 new coronavirus cases since yesterday and an additional 81 lives lost. Illinois has now recorded more than 1,112,000 cases and 18,964 deaths since the onset of the pandemic. Despite enduring a once-in-a-century pandemic, the world is no closer to apocalypse. That's the good news. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, an organization created at the University of Chicago 75 years ago, announced today its 2021 doomsday clock remains at 100 seconds to midnight. That is still perilously close to global catastrophe, according to the group. Rachel Bronson, president of the Bulletin, calls the COVID-19 pandemic a historic wake-up call for humanity and decried the denial of science.
In this time of genuine crisis, governments around the world too often abdicated responsibility, ignored scientific advice, did not cooperate to communicate effectively, and consequently failed to protect the health and welfare of their citizens.
Chicago public school students didn't get a day off this week because of the weather. There are no snow days for remote learning, not that Chicago ever took very many snow days, but there may be a break in class yet this week. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the latest on the standoff between Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union. Amanda.
Brandis, Chicago teachers could go on strike, their second since Mayor Lori Lightfoot took over, as soon as tomorrow. CPS schools have, by and large, been empty since last March because of COVID. The standoff now is over whether it is safe for teachers to return to the classroom, actual classrooms, not remote learning. The district and Mayor Lightfoot say yes. The Chicago Teachers Union says no. Negotiations ongoing for months ran late today. But as of, well, the last time I checked my email before I logged on to be here with you, Brandis, still no word on whether anything solid came out of it. Mayor Lori Lightfoot this afternoon saying CPS would send a notice to parents about what's in store for tomorrow. But again, as of when I last checked my email just before 7, still nothing. Should teachers refuse to physically show up, CPS had been considering locking teachers out of their remote virtual classrooms. But when asked about that prospect around 4 this afternoon, Lightfoot brushed off talk of a lockout.
I don't think we should be talking about lockouts. What we should be talking about is how do we get a deal done so that we can move forward. We've had 3 weeks of successfully implementing the plan that CPS put in place, and by the way, that they shared and adapted as a result of discussions with the CTU. Every single day, what we see is our case rates going down, our positivity rates lowered.
Here's what we do know at this time, that the head of Chicago's Department of Public Health, Dr. Allison Arwady, was brought into negotiations today. And CTU sources say that the tenor of these conversations has changed since passage earlier this month in Springfield of a bill that would give the CTU more bargaining rights. And at this morning's Board of Education meeting, schools chief Janice Jackson outlined the district's renewed offer, which she says includes offering rapid testing to all school employees twice a month.
We will begin offering free monthly COVID testing for students who attend in the zip codes with the 10 highest COVID positivity rates. And when the district begins receiving vaccines directly from the federal government, we will also prioritize vaccinating staff who have been working in those hardest hit communities, as well as staff who have the greatest exposure. The district is also prepared to offer as many medical and caretaker accommodations for telework as possible.
But CTU President Jesse Sharkey says CPS's offer doesn't go far enough with allowing people to work remotely with testing. And he says that the district's plans for returning to remote learning in the case of higher COVID cases or an outbreak would only go remote once it'd be too late. He also questioned why teachers must return to the classrooms before they've received the COVID vaccine.
Is a vaccine free for all? No one is talking to us about what is really possible about the vaccine, the real constraints. If there really was a will, could there be a way? We can't see why you can't phase in a reopening in a way that allows our members to be vaccinated.
The Principals Association, meanwhile, coming out with its own plan attempting to bridge the divide. It calls for opening 50 to 100 schools as a pilot, making sure that the staff who are in those classrooms get vaccine priority, and then phasing in more school openings over time. Director of the Principals Association, Troy LaRaviere, says while CPS has faith in its own plan,
and no matter how sincere the district's faith in its plans is, we need them to understand that their faith does not square with the reality of implementation on the ground in most schools.
President of the school board, Miguel Del Valle, also weighing in on the prospect of another strike. Should it happen again, this would be the second strike in 15 months. In other words, the second time within that span that Chicago students wouldn't be getting a public education.
A strike would be devastating for our students, our parents, our community, who have already endured so much over the last 10 months. We believe our teachers truly want to continue to deliver high-quality instruction to our students, and that they know how debilitating a strike would be for students whose progress and well-being has already been impacted by COVID.
The mayor was asked today about what is different now from that strike in 2019.
We're addressing issues about the schools, which are safe, not only safe as evaluated by our Chicago Department of Public Health, but safe as to CDC guidance and a number of studies that have been done both here in Chicago and across the world. Schools are not generally the source of spread, particularly when you invest in the precautions and mediation efforts like we have.
Now, some students, by the way, had actually returned to the classroom. Pre-K and special needs Chicago public school students were welcomed back early this month. Staff for kindergarten through 8th grade, well, they were supposed to have returned, beginning doing prep on Monday, with a goal of the students who choose from K through 8 returning to their schools starting February 1st. This is, of course, a developing story. As I said, Brandis, you, I'm sure as well. Checking our inboxes, I bet a lot of anxious CPS parents as well. So check the website for any developments. Back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Absolutely. You and I are both watching this closely, and as are a lot of parents. You know, amid the standoff between Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union are students and their parents who are caught in the middle. Joining us now to share their experiences are CPS parents, Flor Dimas, who has 2 children in CPS, one in 3rd grade and the other in 12th, and Natasha Dunn, who has a 6th grader in CPS. Thanks to you both for joining us. Natasha, let's start with you, please. You've got a 6th grader. You would like her to be attending classes in person. Why is that important to you?
It's important to me because right now she's struggling, just like a lot of other African-American students are. And it's a part of making sure that she has a holistic, supportive environment that can encourage her and be able to support her academically.
Now, Flor, you have a 3rd grader and a 12th grader in CPS. You've chosen not to send your children back to in-person learning just yet, and you're not a big fan of schools reopening. Tell us why.
Well, first and foremost, we live in a multi-generational home with grandparents who are high risk. We've taken the safety measures since the beginning of COVID, but my son's school is in a very affluent neighborhood where students will be traveling back from out of the state, including out of the country. I don't feel safe sending my son back if that's going on. And I honestly just don't trust CPS's plan because they put this plan together without consulting the people who will be responsible for opening the schools, and much less the parents. They didn't take into consideration whether or not all families had access to emails to take the surveys that they sent out. And they certainly didn't take into consideration that there could have been language barriers so that parents could answer the surveys properly. I speak English, I speak education language, and I had a hard time understanding what my options were. So if I had a hard time, I know that other parents had a hard time. I know they're not reaching under-resourced and underserved communities. Black and brown communities are always underserved, have the least amount of access.
And Flor, to that point, Flor, you know, obviously the district has said this is about equity for them. They believe remote learning to not necessarily be working for everyone. Natasha, do you think remote learning has exacerbated the inequities that already existed in CPS?
It certainly has, and I would like to say that the reason why I believe in the back to school and why it's important is because of those inequities. Right now, there is currently an achievement gap that Black students are facing with reading and math. This was before the pandemic. So having students out of school when they were struggling before the pandemic and struggling now with the pandemic. I did a Freedom of Information Act to get the grades for the first quarter of the Chicago Public Schools. And what we found was that the first group, the Black networks within CPS had the highest amount of F's and D's than any other network. So it's not working. Remote learning is not working for all children. While it might work for some, it's not working for others. And what it's doing is exacerbating the inequity gap.
Now, I think we've mentioned earlier, the CDC released a report yesterday that says schools can safely reopen, but that the safety precautions are crucial. Flor, does this give you any peace of mind about potentially returning to school?
It actually does not. I worked as a teacher for CPS in the early 2000s, and CPS hasn't changed that much as far as making sure that, again, underserved and under-resourced schools in Black and brown communities have access to the safety measures that are needed in order to return to school. Why haven't they prioritized students and teachers getting vaccinations And why don't they allow parents who choose to return to go back and roll it out slowly and make sure that they have vaccinations and that, our buildings are safe. I can still go to a school, run the water in a bathroom, and I'll have yellow water running out of there. Turn on a vent and wipe down my table a few hours later, that table is going to be filthy again. No, I don't trust that CPS is really doing what they need to do, especially when they're looking. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, not all parents, of course, are able to stay at home and assist with e-learning. Here's a clip from a Monday press conference in support of reopening schools. Willie Preston and his wife, they're not able to work from home. Here's what they said. Looks like we're having a little bit of trouble with that. But basically, ladies, just so you know, he's saying that he's got 6 children, he and his wife, and that it's very difficult for them to find people to come and babysit. Natasha, what have been the challenges of balancing remote learning?
I mean, the challenges pretty much are what Willie spoke of. I think it's important to realize that not everyone have the capacity to stay at home with their child. They don't have the luxury to be able to hire tutors or, have other play dates and things of that nature to support their child's social emotional learning. I think what's also important to remember is that we just can't wait. At the end of the day, our children need to be in school because the longer they're out of school, the harder it's going to be for them to be able to catch up. And I think that when it comes to safety in the buildings, at this point, we've all been in this pandemic together. The teachers are not separate from anyone else. But when you have teachers actually vacationing on the beach in Cancun, maskless, and then saying that they're afraid for schools to reopen, to me, that's highly offensive. And it's not fair because the reality is the world is open. It's open. And when you talk about creating equity, you can't have groups of kids going to private schools and some kids who are in the suburbs who are going to school and then saying that the most low income communities in Chicago don't have access.
Thank you so much. I think we're just getting word from Chicago Public Schools that there will be more remote learning tomorrow. We'll try and get more information on that during the program. And tomorrow night on this program, Mayor Lori Lightfoot and school CEO Janice Jackson will join us for the latest on this situation. But for now, thanks to Flora Demas and Natasha Dunn for joining us. Best of luck. For the first time in 2021, City Council met today to vote on several citywide measures. Among them were changes to Chicago's Welcoming City Ordinance, which further restricts Chicago police from working with federal immigration authorities, extending protections to the city's immigrant community. Also passed, restrictions on converting multi-unit buildings to single-family homes. And what do aldermen think about schools reopening for in-person learning? Joining us are 4 members of the City Council to share their views. 22nd Ward Alderman Michael Rodriguez, 15th Ward Alderman Raymond Lopez, 35th Ward Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, and 38th Ward Alderman Nick Sposato. Gentlemen, thanks to you all for joining us and welcome back to Chicago Tonight. So Alderman Ramirez Rosa, let's start with you, please. So the changes to the city's Welcoming City Ordinance passed City Council today. For years, you've been pushing for these changes, which would limit Chicago police from cooperating with federal immigration authorities. Why were these changes necessary?
It was important because Undocumented Chicagoans said that the city could do more to protect our immigrant community. And it was important because we needed to create a clear line of separation between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement. We needed to assure our undocumented immigrant community, which numbers close to 200,000 people in the city of Chicago, perhaps more, that they did not need to be afraid to call 911, that they didn't need to fear that if they were a victim of domestic violence or if they were a victim of crime and they picked up that phone and called 911, that they or a family member would end up in hands of ICE. And so by having this clear line of separation, we are improving public safety, and we are truly making sure that we are a sanctuary that truly protects all immigrants, and that in no case, in no exception, can the Chicago Police Department work with ICE.
Alderman Lopez and Sposato, the two of you were among the 8 votes that opposed these changes. Alderman Lopez, let's start with you, please. Why did you oppose these?
Well, my opposition to the carve-outs has been consistent ever since it was first proposed under the Rahm Emanuel administration. My concerns about safety of my residents and throughout the entire city of Chicago. I represent many undocumented individuals in the communities that I was elected to serve in Brighton Park and Backyards in particular. And though we continue to help the undocumented in my neighborhoods, they too were concerned that individuals who have chosen a very different and darker path were being given the same amount of compassion as the individuals trying to do right in their new adoptive homes. We feel it's unfair, and it is something that was cause for my opposition and continued opposition today.
Alderman Sposato.
Yeah, similar to what Alderman Lopez said, I'm worried about the criminal element, and by no means am I remotely insinuating that the majority's people are criminals. The far majority of the people that come here are hardworking people, want to make a good life for their family. But we have laws in this country. We are a welcoming country and a city, but we have to follow the laws. So there's a pathway through citizenship, and people need to come that way. So.
Now, Alderman Rodriguez, to that end, there are many immigrants in Chicago who might not feel comfortable calling the police if they have an emergency. But of course, critics say that, this change would allow violent gang members or those who commit crimes to get away with committing them because they're not being reported. How do you reconcile those two differences?
Well, the fact is, today is a great day for our city of Chicago. A clear supermajority of the city council came together, 41-8, to vote in favor of these changes. The fact is that the vast majority of my colleagues agreed with Carlos and I that immigrants need to feel safe in our city. The fact is the vast majority of all of our citizens are not criminals. We need to make sure that we treat immigrants from a welcoming perspective. I represent the 22nd Ward, the most immigrant district in the city of Chicago. Many of my residents come to me and say, we're in the shadows, we're afraid. We don't want to pick up the phone call if we see a crime, because we think authorities are going to come for us and talk to ICE. We've stopped that. And the fact is that a judge can still intervene if there is someone who needs to be held accountable. The city police, the state's attorney will still adjudicate individuals who commit crimes. That's the fear mongering here is absolutely unnecessary. It's a good day in the city of Chicago. A supermajority of my colleagues and I agree that we need to be a welcoming city for immigrants, and we're happy we made that happen today.
So moving on to something else that happened in City Council today, Alderman Ramirez-Rosa, the ordinances that were aimed at curbing gentrification in Pilsen and areas around the 606 were approved today. They limit the conversion of 2 to 6 unit buildings. Converting them into single homes is limited under this. What importance do these buildings, the larger buildings, have in the community?
Well, 2 and 3 flat apartment buildings provide so much of the affordability in so many of our Chicago neighborhoods. 74% of all family-size units in the city of Chicago are actually found in 2, 3, and 4 flats. So when we deconvert those 2 and 3 flats and those 4 flats to single-family homes, we are losing the most affordable housing stock in our community. And what we've seen specifically in Pilsen and what we've seen around the 606 Trail in Logan Square is that the deconversion of these 2 and 4 flats was leading to local businesses closing as they lost their clientele, was leading to the resegregation of our communities. Currently, Logan Square and Pilsen are one of our very few communities that actually have some level of diversity. And what was also happening was we were seeing school enrollment drop and housing prices continue to go up and up and up. So community activists for quite some time have been fighting to say, how do we address this issue? How do we ensure that we're protecting that naturally occurring affordable housing, that gentle density, that middle housing that's found in our communities? And luckily, through working with the Department of Housing, working with the Department of Planning and Development, working with Mayor Lightfoot's administration, my colleague Alderman Laspada, my colleague Alderman Sigcho and I, as well as community groups, Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Pilsen Alliance, we were able to come together to craft just one part of what needs to be a bigger solution. So by saying that you cannot deconvert these 2 and 3 flats to single family homes, we're helping to protect that housing that already exists in our communities. And this is similar to measures that have already been introduced citywide in Minneapolis, that have been introduced in parts of Seattle. This is totally something that was within our right as a city to do, and that is important that we do so that we protect that gentle density, those 2 and 3 flats that provide so much affordability in our neighborhoods.
Now, Alderman Rodriguez, you represent a large Latino community, of course, in the 22nd Ward. What are you hearing from constituents in these multi-unit buildings who are being impacted by soaring rents and displacements?
Well, before I answer that question, I just wanted to thank my 3 colleagues who all joined me in a resolution that Alderwoman Haddon and I presented to talk about federal immigration and making sure that we rolled back the Trump-era anti-immigrant measures. I thank you all for supporting that effort. We had a unanimous support. There was a little hiccup there with one vote, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, I couldn't agree with more with my colleague Ramirez Rosa. You know, Little Village is a neighbor to Pilsen. We see what's going on there, and I think we need to throw everything we can at making sure that we keep affordability here in the city. We've seen record numbers of Black and brown families leave our city over the last several decades. Part of that is attributable to the lack of affordable housing. We need to do everything we can. I think this is a smart bill. Deconversion bills to make sure that we maintain density in our communities, that's very important. That's how you have a thriving city, through density.
And sorry to jump in, Alderman Rodriguez, but we've got about 45 seconds left, and I want to hear from a couple of you about schools. We know that there's been a decent amount of back and forth between CPS and the CTU. Recently, there's been some research from the CDC in Wisconsin saying that viral spread within schools can be limited with proper mitigation. Alderman Sposato, first to you. Is it time to reopen schools? We've got a few seconds.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, we got to get our kids back in school. I'm not sure when the right time is, but there's one thing I certainly want to make sure: once we go back, we stay back. I don't want to go back now and then 2 weeks later we're out. So my thing is, we just need to make sure it's the right time.
Alderman Ramirez Rosa, your thoughts on, Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Brandis. You know, unfortunately, our children have been the political football when it comes to public education ever since the pandemic started. We've seen where our students have not been going to school online consistently, and they're only going to be further put behind if we continue to have these egos battling each other with our children caught in the middle. So I hope we get resolution that is in the interest of our students and not just political ego stroking.
What is that resolution? What could it look like?
Well, I think there is a way that we could discuss with our stakeholders, with our teachers, with our parents, with the administration, all in a room to do what is necessary for our students. If that means they go back with proper precautions, so be it. If it means that we continue online, so be it. But we have to have a discussion that's aimed at making sure that our students are getting educated and are not just being kicked around as like a political football just to score points with our respective constituencies, which is what all we've seen up until this point.
Okay, lots of tough decisions. My thanks to 22nd Ward Alderman Michael Rodriguez, 15th Ward Alderman Raymond Lopez, 35th Ward Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, and of course 38th Ward Alderman Nick Sposato. And up next, a look at Chicago artists joining others from across the country in demanding federal relief aid. Stick around. Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
And we have much more ahead on the program, including a one-on-one with Governor Pritzker's top advisor on marijuana. But first, artists are calling on the Biden administration to allocate relief aid for the arts sector in a bill known as the DAWN Act, or Defend Arts Workers Now. Started by Chicago playwright Matthew Lee Earlbach, arts correspondent Angel Ito shares how they plan to fight for aid for an industry responsible for an $877 billion contribution to the U.S. economy.
In collaboration with the Be an Arts Hero campaign, arts workers from across the country are writing their senators, demanding more federal funds. They say dedication to their craft has added more to the economy than agriculture and mining combined.
When we look at Illinois, it's a $30 billion in added value to Illinois' economy, which is massive. It supports, arts and culture supports over 224,000 jobs in arts and culture. And again, that's people in front of the camera and on stage to sound technicians, pyrotechnicians, engineers, puppeteers, museum docents, people who are working in broadcast, you name it. And so when you look at all those jobs in Illinois in particular, you really want to put an economic floor under them, because if they go, that's a huge chunk of Illinois' economy.
The campaign is organized by Chicago playwright Matthew Lee Earlbach and features letters from more than 200 artists.
Because artists have the skills to build communities and coalitions. Work with artists when we need to envision truly new solutions for wicked problems.
Chicago actress Ife Butler is one of them. She says the support would also be a reflection of appreciation for the work people do in the arts.
So love us back a little bit. We need you. We need your support. We have families. We have homes. I know a lot of people have this misconception that artists are like these wildflower people that kind of roam the streets and, or else they're independently wealthy or they really don't need money. Because we're always thought of those people that don't really have a job. People always look at us and go, okay, so that's fun. When are you going to get a job? This is a job. This is my life. And it's hanging in the balance. And for all of those arts workers out there, we need you. We need you. We're independent contractors, many, many of us, and we need your support. So fight for us.
The Dawn Act would have the government to authorize $43.8 billion to make direct grants that benefit artists, performance venues, and all other art-related businesses. That includes community programs like Young Chicago Authors. Creative director Kevin Koval says moments like Amanda Gorman's recent inaugural poem are reflective of art's ability to bring people together.
If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Poetry in its best lived practice is a radically democratic form that really truly believes, holds the notion that regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, you have something essential to say.
With approximately 5.1 billion arts workers across the country, Earlbach says the Dawn Act would solve a problem while also recognizing arts workers as the cornerstone of America's economic recovery.
The problem of economic catastrophe, which is what we're facing. We're the first to close, we're the last to reopen, and the Dawn Act is saying, here's how we get not only economic revival, but national reconciliation.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Arts workers are asking that $43.8 billion grant help them with expenses incurred through June 30th, 2021. Visit our website for more information on the Dawn Act and the Be an Arts Hero campaign. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, Emmett Till's childhood home is now a Chicago landmark. What that means for the red brick two-flat. How Illinois aims to expand access to marijuana dispensary licenses after intense criticism from equity advocates.
It's always challenging to figure out and strike the right balance, but I think we can do better.
And our Spotlight Politics team examines Mayor Lori Lightfoot's plan to redraw the city council map this year and much more. But first, some more of today's top stories. An annual count of Chicago's homeless population has begun. The Chicago Department of Family and Support Services handles the annual point-in-time assessment, which aims to create a comprehensive tally of the homeless, including those living on the streets, in shelters, or simply riding public transportation for warmth and shelter. The 2020 count found just under 5,400 people were homeless, a 2% increase from 2019. Each year, the data is used to identify need and to determine the allocation of resources for housing and other services for the homeless. City Council's Latino caucus today rejected a call to charge an independent commission with the redrawing of boundaries of Chicago's 50 wards, saying aldermen are best equipped to ensure that the new map is equitable. Caucus chairman and Alderman Roberto Maldonado insisted that aldermen themselves should be the ones to draw the boundaries and, quote, dismiss the myth that an independent commission would truly represent our interests. Maldonado says Chicago Latinos got shortchanged in the last remap.
10 years ago, knowing the history of what happened and having been there 10 years ago in the process, we were played, Latinos, we were played. We ended up with less seats in the city council than the ones that we should have had. And I think that this time around, we cannot allow that to happen.
And Illinois health officials report more than 3,700 new coronavirus cases since yesterday and an additional 81 lives lost. The state has now recorded more than 1,112,000 cases and 18,964 deaths since the onset of the pandemic. It's official. Emmett Till's childhood home is a Chicago landmark. This after City Council voted to give landmark status to the red brick 2-flat. As a 14-year-old, Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi 65 years ago, galvanizing the civil rights movement. Earlier today, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, whose ward includes Till's former Woodlawn home, spoke about the significance of today's vote.
We still have a real problem in this country not addressing the brutality that has happened to Black folks, but also making sure we apologize and recognize it and do things to move forward. We will repeat history if we don't address it.
And Alderwoman Taylor's virtual background there, a photo of Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. Patty, what's the process been for this house to get landmark status, and what does it mean now?
Yeah, this has been something that preservationists have been pushing for a while, but when 2020 rolled around and it was the 65th anniversary of Emmett's murder, the timing all aligned and they received preliminary landmark status back in September. And then it's just been a process of working through final landmark, city council approval, committees approvals, but today it's 100% official, a landmark now.
And what's next for the home?
Well, that was the big question back in September when preliminary status was awarded, and that's become a whole lot clearer in the past couple of months. The organization Blacks in Green has purchased the home, and they have intentions to turn it into international heritage pilgrimage site where you will learn about the story of the Great Migration as told through the lens of the Till Mobley family. So it'll be a lot about the civil rights movement and also about the Great Migration.
Can't wait to see that when they are done with it. In the meantime, my thanks to Patty Wetley. And you can read Patty's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. It's been 1 year of legal marijuana in Illinois. More than $1 billion of recreational and medical weed was sold here in 2020, and the state has expunged hundreds of thousands of marijuana-related arrests. But Illinois' cannabis program has also come under heavy fire from equity advocates who say people of color have been locked out of the chance to open dispensaries. Joining us with more is Toy Hutchinson, senior advisor to Governor J.B. Pritzker on cannabis control and a former state senator from Chicago's south suburbs. Welcome back to Chicago tonight, of course. So 1 year of recreational marijuana, what grade would you give the state's handling of the rollout so far, Toy?
Oh, incomplete. We're not done. We're nowhere near done. This is our first attempt at trying to dismantle something that's about 80 years coming. So I don't think there's a finished product just yet. I just think that we're trying to plug away as hard as we can to get to what the intention of the legislation was and meet the demands that the world is watching.
Now, as mentioned, there have been numerous equity concerns raised by people of color in applying for those dispensary licenses. Here's a brief clip of one applicant we spoke with a few weeks ago.
I think what stings the most is when we get these reports about how much money is being made. Well, we're up to close to $1 billion, and none of us have been approved. It's just not fair. I can't even say I'm happy for the people that's making that billion, because that should be us. This bill was sold to us for economic development and social equity in our communities.
Toy, you give the state an incomplete grade. What is your response to those Black and Latino applicants who feel they've been locked out of this process?
Well, they're not. Nobody's been locked out. This is a time for when we have to find all the mistakes, all the things, and keep working. Like the thing about the money that's been spent right now, we had a major goal that was actually broken down into 3 different places. How do you change the face of the industry? What do you do with the money? And how do you undo past harms? And even in the face of a global pandemic, we have been trying to work on all 3 of those fronts. I know every time we see high dollars, I also know that 1 out of every $4 that comes back to the state from those sales is plugged into a community reinvestment program. And we just announced $32.4 million of grants to Black and brown communities who have been underserved for so long, in addition to 20,000 pardons for arrests and over 500,000 or almost 500,000 arrest records expunged. And we are still intently trying to make sure that the way we change the face of this industry happens with the way we intended it for it to happen in the first place. This is an ongoing thing. It's taking way longer than any of us wanted, but the goal and the intention has never changed. That when we build an industry in this state, it's going to look like nowhere else in the country. Because unfortunately, the cannabis industry across the country and the whole world looks exactly the way it does here in Illinois. And that's the whole reason we're here. The stories of entrepreneurs that are going to get this shot I cannot wait until they actually have a chance to be out front and run their businesses.
And Toy, and I do want to come back to the community grants that you just mentioned a second ago, but it has been announced that the state will allow applicants to remedy their applications submitted for dispensary licenses. Do you have confidence that those applicants will feel more included and that they've been through a transparent process going forward?
Oh, we're doing our absolute best to do that, because nothing matters if there's no trust in the process. And at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, the goal is to change the face of this industry, and none of us are going to stop until that happens. The community's not going to stop demanding it. The applicants are not going to stop demanding it. And luckily, we have a governor and a whole administration that are actually keyed into the fact that we must do this, because there's no way we can continue to normalize and legalize something where the prohibition of that exact same activity harmed our communities for as long as it did. And you don't get economic justice without racial justice. So the whole point of this is to get us to the point where we break through the hardest barrier, which is to actually see people of color in positions of ownership in this industry.
And what changes do you think need to happen to that application process to reach that point, to change the face of the industry?
Well, right now pretty soon we're working through the supplemental deficiency process. People will be able to, we're trying to identify mistakes that were no fault of the applicants. And that's critical. That's like, we don't want to have any situation where there is a lottery happening where people who should be in position to participate in that aren't. That's about being as fair and equitable as we possibly can. So first step is to write that process. The second step is that we're going to need help from our legislative partners to authorize an additional lottery. And the good thing about that is that I think there's large agreement amongst the community, amongst the advocates, amongst people who really know what's at stake here to try to get that done. It's difficult now just because of COVID conditions and when the legislature can meet. But the thing that is heartening about all of this, because the feelings on behalf of the community are real, is that there are a lot of people at the table trying to figure out how to make the fixes we need to move this thing forward. We're always going to have barriers. There are always going to be people who don't want us to succeed, but that's not where we are right now. Our goal was to change the face of the industry, figure out how to best use the money from this, and then undo those past harms. And we've been doing everything we can do in all of those silos to move this thing forward. We're trying to.
And Toy, we've got about 25 seconds left. If you had to give it a timeline, how soon would you like to see that next set of licenses being distributed?
Oh, personally, I'd like to see them yesterday. But we're going to have to go through a legislative process, and we're going to have to go through a supplemental process to make sure that everybody knows what's expected and that scores are accurate, and then people can trust the results. Okay. And that's going to take the time to do that right.
It's going to take a little patience. All right, Toy Hutchinson, thank you so much for joining us. Up next, our Spotlight Politics team dives into the battle over reopening Chicago schools. But first, a look at the weather. Possible teacher strike looms over safety issues as city and state COVID-19 mitigations are being rolled back. Our Spotlight Politics team is here to take a look at that and much more. Tonight, we're joined once again by Amanda Vinicki and Heather Sharon. So in a tweet just posted, as well as in an email sent to parents of Chicago Public School students, the district says, quote, CTU leadership has directed staff to remain home tomorrow. Due to the union's directive, we are unable to guarantee sufficient staffing to safely cover in-person learning, and parents should not send their children to school. Remote learning will continue tomorrow, Thursday, January 28th. Seems that we're sort of on a day-by-day basis at this point. Amanda, we know that negotiations between the district and the union are continuing. Where are we at this point with that tweet?
It appears as if we are still at a standoff, and what happened, as I reported earlier in the show, we know that negotiations today really ran late. Perhaps that is good news. Maybe they made some progress, just not enough. I have to say, I'm not a parent myself, but boy, would this have me in a tither, as if living through a pandemic isn't quite enough. You don't know whether your child is going to be learning, whether it is going to be in front of a computer or preparing to go to a classroom. I bet you've got a whole lot of anxious kids as well. And if they're not going to be, sitting in front of a computer, going through classroom virtually, if they're going to just be doing what all day long? I mean, this really is quite the kerfuffle, and it seems as if, while we've had some progress, again, neither side is willing to really back down, and it's not as if we have a huge influx of vaccines coming, so you can assuage any of those fears about hurrying to get those shots into the arms of CPS teachers.
And right now, like this week, we know that it is affecting mostly the pre-K students and the cluster, the special needs students. Here's what Chicago Public Schools CEO Janice Jackson, she said something last night at a press conference.
We have made a commitment to expand surveillance testing and telework accommodations for staff to prioritize vaccinations in our hardest hit communities. We believe that our latest proposal to the union can serve as a foundation to a deal. Frankly, there is no good reason why we shouldn't have an agreement at this time right now.
And Heather, I know you are a parent, probably lots of parents who have whiplash right now because both sides have competing messages on the safety of returning to school. They've both enlisted some scientists and some experts. What do we know about that?
Well, it really depends on what you're talking about. And the issue remains is that there's still a lot of COVID-19 circulating out in Chicago, and the teachers union has yet to be sort of assured that if teachers do go back in person to teach elementary school students, that they will be as protected as possible. So it seems like the hang-up seems to be in terms of what percentage positivity of each school will trigger a shutdown. Well, how will they quarantine exactly? And then, of course, there's the issue of teachers who are at greatest risk themselves of contracting COVID-19, or they're worried about passing it on to a loved one in their bubble who might have a health issue. So part of what, the kerfluffle that Amanda was talking about for parents is that it's so hard to know sort of what actually the science is saying, because you have the mayor saying the science tells us it's safe, but then you have the teachers union saying not so fast. And that's really sort of what this has come down to. We do know that Dr. Allison Arwady, the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health, was at the negotiating table this afternoon. The mayor told us that. So that would seem to be that these questions of science are sort of front and center about getting kids back to school, perhaps on February 1st, perhaps later at this point.
Well, and of course, you also have CDC coming out with guidance saying that, yes, it's safe for schools, but ... if it's safe, and therein really lies the question. And of course, this is also a political story too, given that it would be potentially the second strike during Mayor Lightfoot's term. So Brandis, you cover education. I'm curious, we know that school will be in tomorrow remotely, despite that not being what CPS and Mayor Lightfoot originally wanted. But what do you think about the prospect of a strike?
I know that's the question that a lot of parents are obviously wondering exactly what is going to happen. Will there be a strike, or will the district say, you know what, we can't send students back to school if we know that teachers are refusing to come in, so we'll continue to work remotely, thus averting a strike. We do know that the Chicago Teachers Union is powerful, and they have done a good job at organizing their communities and parents around them and around their mission and their agenda. And so often they have the support of the community when they are taking a strike, and they have, they do a good job at making their case. But you have to admit, when students haven't been in school since March of last year, the optics of teachers protesting outside of buildings that have been empty for that long, I don't know how that is going to look to parents. So I can't wait to see how this plays out, obviously. Heather, K-8 teachers and other staffers, now they're the ones who are expected to return this past Monday. It is their students who are expected to return this coming Monday. What's the likelihood that both of them actually make it into school buildings next week?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot was asked exactly that this afternoon, and she said that she was still targeting that return date. I think that every day teachers, elementary school teachers, don't go back to start planning for their return. I think that gets into greater doubt because teachers haven't been in the building since March, like you said. So they're going to need time to set up their classroom. They will also need time to review the new safety protocols, which are, of course, of the utmost importance to ensure that kids and teachers don't get sick. But that, I think, is really where the rubber is going to meet the road on this issue, because right now it's only about 6,000, 7,000 kids in preschool and in special education cluster programs that are really sort of being kept home. I think that calculus changes if you tell, tens of thousands of elementary school kids, hey, you were supposed to go back to school February 1st. Turns out you can't. That, I think, is a political dilemma of a totally different nature than the one that we're looking at today.
Well, and I'll add, I know we covered the news about IHSA talking about high school sports, and for those CPS athletes, that's also got to be part of the element in discussion that I imagine will be part of this talk. There's so much frustration on the part of those athletes and their parents about the prospect of missing out on an entire future and scholarships if they don't have a chance to hit the field.
Now, obviously, the big concern here is the COVID-19 pandemic. Heather, you covered a story that found some racial disparities abound in vaccine distribution. What did you find out?
That's right. We got the first look at the data that shows that 53% of all Chicago residents who have gotten the COVID-19 vaccine as of earlier this week were white. Now, 20% of those who have died from COVID-19 are white in Chicago. So that tells you that the disparity is really stark. This is a pandemic that has killed disproportionately Black Chicagoans and Latino Chicagoans, and those have been among the people who have been most reluctant to get the vaccine. And we've talked a lot on the show about this sort of historic racism that those groups have faced in terms of healthcare, but that is really coming to bear. And Mayor Lightfoot called those figures alarming and said that it is really sort of frustrating to know that these vaccines are most needed in the Black and Latino community, who are the most reluctant to take them. So the city's going to step up efforts in the neighborhoods that are being hardest hit by COVID-19 to encourage them to get the vaccine. However, the main issue still is the lack of supply of the vaccine in Chicago. Chicago's only getting about 34,000 doses of the vaccine every week. The city could vaccinate 170,000 people. That's quite a difference.
So in state politics, the governor is urging lawmakers to get back to work, to the work of the people, despite the pandemic. Take a look.
We need the legislature to get back into session. They want to be back in session, I know. If you talk to all the legislators, everybody's got important legislation they need to get done for the people of their districts. I want that to happen, and so the sooner the legislature gets to work, the better, whether it's remotely or in Springfield, but we need legislation to keep moving.
Now, Amanda, lawmakers are usually in session for a few weeks in February. It looks like they've only been called back for a day. Clearly, the governor wants them to be working. What's going on, and do you think they will adopt some sort of remote voting?
So I think several things are going on. First of all, part of the governor's frustration is that he has quite the budget pickle. And during that lame duck session, he had wanted the legislature to give him authority to basically not allow small businesses to take advantage of a tax break afforded them by some changes in federal law, a break meant to give to small businesses that were hurting because of the pandemic. And he couldn't get enough support for that. So that left him in a tight spot with the budget. And he wants them to hurry, if at all possible, to get that passed because the timeline is running out. That's one dynamic. Another dynamic at play is that you have a lot of legislators senators that are saying, hey, if you're going to bring me back to the Capitol to potentially be meeting with constituents, as they often do, lobbyists with one another, they want to be higher up in line for that COVID vaccine, something that Illinois' rules are not currently allowing. So that is one of the dynamics. Right now, as you said, Brandis, they are going to be back at least for one day in February. And so, yes, I do expect that there will be some sort of change in the rules that will allow particularly the House, which hasn't been doing any of that. The Senate has at least been holding committee meetings virtually that will allow the House to do so. Now, of course, that it has a brand new speaker, now that the tech-averse Michael Madigan is no longer in that job.
Right. And quickly, guys, I think, did we lose Heather? Chicago City Council. Okay, so they're going to start going to their own remap process. Here's what Mayor Lori Lightfoot had to say today.
Obviously, aldermen have a very specific role to play, and they should. But this can't be a backroom, closed-door deal that the public has no insights into, because whatever the product is not going to have legitimacy.
Modern technology, unfortunately, it's just me and Amanda. Amanda, briefly, how different might the map look with the population shrinking? We've got 10 seconds.
It's going to look very different. I think really the big thing is that the U.S. Census Bureau announced today that it is going to be delayed by like 4 months, the information that leads to the drawing of those maps. So everything is going to be pushed back, and that is going to be huge and difficult for politicians at every level.
Okay. Amanda Vinicky, and our thanks to Heather Sharon as well. We miss her. That's our Spotlight Politics, and that's our show for this Wednesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, sponsoring a free continuing legal education program for over a decade for lawyers across the state.